Do Americans often relocate because of political views? I am Korean and I have never been in the US. I mostly lived in France though, and as it is seen in France and by French people, some American policies look very strange. So as the title says, do many Americans move states because of political parties? For example, as I understand, Texas seems to be a strong Republican state. Do Democrats in Texas move because of drastic Republican views? For instance, if my country would have school shootings, I would definitely be open to move to another country as I begin to have kids. I am not trying to raise a debate, I was just curious and looking for people's experiences. X200B X200B Edit. Thank you all for your testimonies. It is so much more helpful to understand individual experiences than shish tea we see on the internet. X200B Rich people maybe, but most of us can't afford to just leave BC we don't like something. We sure do talk about it a lot, but it's not common to follow through with it. Most of the people I actually hear moving for political reasons are driven by legislation which makes it hard for them to live and do their job. For example, a lot of OB-GYNs don't want to work in a state where performing an abortion, even to save the life of the mother, may soon be illegal. I think that the ones with the financial resources to do so do. But there are many who do not have the ability to do so, like myself. I think the ones who can't afford to move just have to bite our tongues when politics get brought up, which seems to happen more and more often as we close in on election season here. I haven't moved because of it, but it's influencing our decision of where our next move is. Feel like the most common example of this is moving from a smaller town to a big city. 'Cause even in solid red states the big cities will be Democratic leaning and far more accepting. So yay if you're a leftist in a medium-sized town that votes right, that's someone likely to move to their state's big city. However, I'm not sure how many people can afford moves further than that. If you can afford it you do, if you cannot you don't. I don't think people move states as often, but it's not uncommon for young adults from rural towns, usually quite conservative places, to move to cities, almost always liberal places, after college. That being said, it affects people differently. People who are LGBT and especially parents of LGBT kids have to seriously consider before moving to places like Florida. And women may want to look up birth control and abortion laws before moving to a place. But people less affected by politics, the stereotype being a straight, white, Christian couple with copy and paste kids, don't need to consider politics when moving. My family will be moving out of our red state to a nearby blue one in the next 5 years, and it's entirely due to politics. Conservatives definitely moved to Florida because of Ron DeSantis. Reflected in my new arrival neighbors. Liberals are definitely leaving Florida because of Ron DeSantis. Reflected in school teacher friends who have left or are in the process of leaving the state. My friends are a lesbian couple with an adoptive son who is not biologically either of theirs. They fled Florida because of all the scary legislation that was being passed. I also know people with a trans child who left Florida also because they didn't think it was safe there anymore. I know some couples who are trying to leave Texas because they fear what would happen if their daughters needed medical care associated with pregnancy and were denied. That's a motivator. However, the biggest motivator for people moving between states and settling down is economics. If you're making $45,000 living in California, you're basically poor. That salary will carry you much farther in other states, and your quality of life will sure to improve due to lower cost of living. I live in LA and California is a blue state, but I noticed whenever a state took away rights for women such as abortion rights, then I'd see a small uptick of women from those states moving to LA. I don't blame them. If you can afford to. Yes. It's not uncommon for liberal Americans in the South to relocate to blue states if they have enough money to do so. Sometimes, but there's also democratic cities that are welcoming, such as Austin, Texas. No. Often relocate due to economic views. Like less income taxes, no property taxes, higher pay, etc. For example, people move to Austin from California to avoid paying income taxes. It's like high ground of Texas, and suddenly they are hit by highest they ever saw property taxes. Since state budget need to be balanced. I am trans. I have housed many people in the trans community running from places where they had constant death threats at minimum. I've been living in a more liberal part of the country for most of my life. I've had a couple of interesting job offers recently, but they were both in areas of the country that are becoming extremely bigoted and conservative. I know that even in the more conservative areas, there are likely to be at least some people who share my more left-leaning views. Most areas aren't monolithic. Still, I've turned down both offers because I'm concerned about the long-term welfare of both my spouse and my kids in such an overall hostile environment. So in my case, I guess you could say that I'm not moving around the country due to my views. Quite often we move for normal reasons. My wife and I moved from NYC to Texas because she grew up there and her parents are getting older. We want to be available to help them. My mother also moved to the area. So now we can all look after family easier. We don't agree with the politics, but maybe we can do something to change things. I moved from a conservative suburb into the heart of the city, St. Louis, last year. It wasn't the only reason we wanted to be in the city, because we're early 30s with no kids and plenty of disposable income. Wanted to be around things to do, but it contributed. I had a couple of neighbors who kept their Trump signs in their yard for 2 years after the election. And no stable person does that. Grew up in Boston, Mass. Have been living in Charleston, South Carolina for the last 5 years. We moved here solely because the winters in New England will literally try to kill you. There has been a massive influx of people that have moved here from all over the country. The number one reason we typically hear as to why people have moved here is due to politics. Almost every New Yorker that I talk to has left because of liberalism. And shockingly, they happen to also be the most obnoxious people you will ever meet. Grew up in OK. The political climate is destroying the state. My husband and I jumped at the first opportunity to leave. It was painful to move from such a low cost of living to the East Coast. But we are so happy. I'll even tolerate the purple state status of VA. There are red states, then there are deep red states in the Bible Belt. I think not so much in the past. But there's certainly an uptick since Trump and the incoming conservative Gilead started gaining ground. When human rights are under attack, people will move. I personally know 2 people who have moved from the South, where I used to live, to MA in order to feel safer. Not in this economy. I love my state location. Just not the majority beliefs. I know plenty of places I wouldn't move to, haha. For the most part, no. Unless they are adversely affected, and even then they need the capital to be able to move, and many don't have it. Some people might consider politics when moving, but other factors like affordability and the availability of jobs would probably matter more.